What would you do if someone you loved walked into the wilderness and simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but questions and an empty car in a parking lot? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Picture this: a bright August morning in 2023, perfect hiking weather, crystal clear skies stretching endlessly over the Sierra Peaks. Emma Davis, a talented 26-year-old photographer with an infectious smile and an eye for capturing nature's most breathtaking moments, kisses her camera goodbye and heads into some of the most challenging terrain North America has to offer. She's prepared, experienced, and absolutely passionate about wilderness photography. She has all the right gear, years of hiking experience, and a detailed plan that she's shared with her family. She even carries a satellite messenger device for daily check-ins. Everything seems perfect. But here's where this story takes a chilling turn that will make you question everything you think you know about wilderness safety. Has this ever happened to you? That moment when someone you care about doesn't answer their phone and a tiny seed of worry starts growing in your chest. Emma's mother, Linda, felt exactly that when Sunday evening came and went without the expected call from her daughter. By Monday night, that worry had transformed into something much darker, a parent's worst nightmare beginning to unfold. The Sierra Peaks don't compromise. These ancient granite spires rise from rocky basin like sleeping giants that have witnessed countless human stories, both triumphant and tragic. For centuries, adventurers have been drawn to their raw, unforgiving beauty, but these mountains have also claimed many lives, holding their secrets close in hidden crevices and shadowed valleys that searchers might never find. What makes Emma's case so particularly haunting is that she wasn't just another unprepared tourist who wandered off the beaten path. This was a woman who understood the wilderness, who had spent over a year living in Mountain View specifically to be close to these peaks she photographed with almost religious devotion. Her apartment walls were covered with topographic maps marked with pencil lines showing past adventures and future dreams. She knew these mountains intimately, or so everyone thought. When the search teams deployed across the Sierra Peaks wilderness, they expected to find Emma within days, maybe injured but alive, waiting for rescue at some scenic overlook where she'd stopped to capture the perfect shot. Stay with me until the end, because what they actually discovered would challenge everything investigators believed about missing person cases in national wilderness areas. The initial clues seemed straightforward enough: a perfectly set-up campsite near Pine Lake, exactly where Emma's itinerary said it should be. But as searchers examined the scene more closely, they realized something was terribly wrong. The evidence didn't add up, didn't follow any logical pattern that experienced wilderness rescue teams had ever encountered before. What you're about to discover might surprise you, because this isn't just another story about someone getting lost in the mountains. This case would eventually expose a predator who used America's most beautiful wilderness areas as his hunting ground, turning places of natural wonder into scenes of unimaginable horror. The search for Emma Davis would ultimately reveal that sometimes the greatest dangers in the wilderness don't come from weather, wildlife, or falling rocks. Sometimes the most terrifying threat walks on two legs and knows exactly how to use the vastness and isolation of our national treasures to hide in plain sight, stalking those who seek solace and beauty in nature's embrace. Emma's journey to the Sierra Peaks wasn't accidental. It was the result of a profound transformation that many of us can relate to. Just 18 months before her disappearance, she was living a completely different life in a bustling city, working as a graphic designer for a corporate firm, creating digital art for brands that meant nothing to her soul. The hidden truth is that Emma felt trapped in a world of deadlines and conference rooms, yearning for something deeper, something real. The turning point came during a weekend camping trip that was supposed to be just a quick getaway. When Emma first saw the Sierra Peaks rising from Rocky Basin, something shifted inside her mindset completely. She later told friends it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before. Within 6 months, she had made the bold decision to leave everything behind: her steady paycheck, her predictable routine, her entire established life, to chase a dream that most people would consider risky. Her small apartment in Mountain View became a testament to this radical life change. Where most people hang family photos or artwork, Emma's walls were covered with intricate topographic maps marked with colored pencils, each line representing a trail she'd conquered or dreamed of exploring. Her own photographs surrounded these maps like windows into another world. Stunning images of wildlife silhouettes against dawn skies, delicate alpine flowers clinging to rocky ledges, and the raw, untamed beauty of granite peaks that seemed to touch the heavens themselves. What's fascinating about Emma's transformation is how completely she embraced this new identity. She wasn't just taking pictures, she was documenting a love affair with the wilderness that bordered on spiritual devotion. Her camera wasn't just a tool. It was her way of translating the profound emotions these mountains stirred in her into something tangible, something she could share with the world. Behind the scenes of her Instagram posts and gallery submissions was a young woman who had found her true calling. Someone who understood that real fulfillment often requires leaving the safe path and venturing into unknown territory. Her journey from corporate designer to wilderness photographer represented the kind of courage most of us only dream about having. But here's where Emma's story takes on a darker dimension that reveals an uncomfortable reality about following our dreams into isolated places. Her passion for solitude and remote locations, the very thing that gave her life meaning and purpose, would also make her vulnerable in ways she never anticipated. The hidden truth about Emma's approach to wilderness photography is what makes her disappearance so absolutely baffling to everyone who knew her. This wasn't someone who made impulsive decisions or took unnecessary risks. Emma's mindset was that of a professional strategist, treating every expedition like a military operation where preparation could mean the difference between life and death. Friends would watch in amazement as Emma spread her maps across her living room floor, armed with colored pencils, rulers, and notebooks filled with detailed calculations. She would spend hours studying elevation profiles, weather patterns, and water sources. Behind the scenes of every stunning photograph she captured was weeks of meticulous research and planning. She knew exactly where the sun would rise and set, which angles would provide the best shots, and how many calories she'd burn on each section of trail. This methodical approach was about to be put to its ultimate test. Emma had been planning something that would represent a major transformation in her artistic journey, a 4-day solo expedition through the notoriously challenging Wildflower Canyon Cascade Canyon Loop. This wasn't just another weekend hike, it was her personal Everest, a grueling 20-mile circuit that would push every skill she'd developed to its absolute limit. The impact of this particular route on serious hikers cannot be overstated. We're talking about punishing elevation gains, exposed ridges where weather can change in minutes, and technical terrain that demands both physical stamina and mental fortitude. Most experienced hikers attempt this loop with partners or guides, but Emma's vision required solitude. She needed to be alone with the wilderness to capture the intimate, almost spiritual connection she felt with these peaks. What drove her to choose this specific challenge was her artistic ambition. Emma had been working toward her first gallery exhibition, and she believed this expedition would provide the cornerstone images that would establish her reputation as a serious wilderness photographer. She wasn't just chasing pretty pictures, she was pursuing a revelation that could only come from pushing herself into the most demanding and beautiful places the Sierra Peaks had to offer. The weeks leading up to her departure revealed Emma's incredible attention to detail. She portioned her food into labeled Ziploc bags for each day, tested every piece of gear multiple times, and even practiced setting up her tent in different weather conditions. Her preparation was so thorough that her mother later described watching Emma organize her equipment as watching an artist prepare for the performance of a lifetime. The final week before Emma's departure revealed a level of obsession that goes beyond normal preparation. It was the behavior of someone whose entire identity had become intertwined with achieving something extraordinary. Her roommate, Chloe, would later describe watching Emma in those last days as witnessing an artist consumed by a vision that only she could see. Emma would sit for hours on their living room floor, surrounded by maps, tracing and retracing her route with almost religious devotion. What drove this intense focus was Emma's belief that she could capture something no other photographer had ever achieved: the perfect sunrise from Wildflower Divide. She had studied the astronomical data, calculated the exact positioning of the sun during her planned arrival, and even researched historical weather patterns to maximize her chances of clear skies. This wasn't just about taking a pretty picture, it was about creating a masterpiece that would define her artistic legacy. The hidden truth behind Emma's meticulous planning reveals something profound about how passion can transform into dangerous tunnel vision. Her mindset had shifted from simple preparation to an almost spiritual quest. She believed that if she could just reach that specific spot at that exact moment, she would capture an image that would change everything: her career, her reputation, her entire future as an artist. During her final video call with her mother Linda, Emma's excitement was palpable through the screen. She methodically showed off each piece of gear laid out on her apartment floor like a general displaying weapons before battle. Her lightweight tent, down sleeping bag, compact stove, first aid kit, water filtration system, every item had been selected for a specific purpose and tested multiple times. Most importantly, she held up her satellite messenger device, promising her mother she would send check-in messages every evening. Behind the scenes of this touching mother-daughter moment was something neither of them could have anticipated. Emma's thorough preparation and communication plan would later become crucial, evidence in understanding exactly what happened to her. The impact of this final conversation would haunt Linda for months as she replayed every word, searching for any sign that her daughter sensed danger ahead. What's particularly chilling about Emma's state of mind during these final preparations is how completely focused she was on her artistic goals. Her journal entries from that week reveal someone who was thinking only about light angles, camera settings, and the technical challenges of her route. There's no mention of personal safety concerns or awareness that someone might be watching, planning, waiting for the perfect opportunity. Friday, August 12, 2023, dawned with the kind of perfection that makes you believe the universe is conspiring in your favor. Emma's silver Honda pulled into the Crystal Lake Trailhead parking lot under a brilliant, cloudless sky, the morning air crisp and sharp with the scent of pine and possibility. This was the culmination of months of planning, and nature seemed to be offering its blessing with ideal conditions that any photographer would pray for. The transformation in Emma's energy that morning was visible to everyone around her. The nervous excitement of the previous weeks had settled into a calm confidence that comes when preparation meets opportunity. She moved with purpose, shouldering her pack and checking her gear one final time before stepping into her destiny. The hidden truth is that this moment represented everything Emma had worked towards since leaving her corporate life behind: the perfect convergence of passion, skill, and circumstance. What happened next would become one of the most analyzed interactions in the entire investigation. Emma approached an elderly couple from Texas who were admiring the reflection of the cathedral group in the still waters of Crystal Lake. Gerald and Eleanor were typical tourists, cameras in hand, marveling at a landscape that existed beyond their everyday experience. Emma's decision to ask them for a photograph reveals something beautiful about her character. Even in her focused state, she remained warm and approachable, embodying the best of what wilderness communities represent. The impact of that simple request cannot be overstated. Gerald eagerly agreed, and in that moment, he captured what would become the most widely circulated image of Emma Davis, a young woman radiating pure joy, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing a bright pink tank top that stood out against the deep green forest behind her. She holds a black hiking pole confidently, her heavy pack settled on her shoulders, and behind her, the Sierra Peaks rise like ancient guardians, majestic and serene. Behind the scenes of this seemingly innocent interaction was something none of them could have imagined. This photograph would become the face of a mystery that would captivate the nation, appearing on missing person posters, news broadcasts, and countless online forums. Gerald and Eleanor would later tell investigators that Emma seemed incredibly happy, almost glowing with excitement about her adventure ahead. The couple remembered Emma telling them she felt like the luckiest person in the world to have these mountains in her backyard. Her genuine enthusiasm and infectious smile made such an impression that they watched her walk toward the trailhead with admiration, thinking how wonderful it was to see someone so young and passionate about the, wilderness. After thanking Gerald and Eleanor, Emma walked to a quiet spot by the pristine lake shore, pulled out her phone, and sent what would become the most heartbreaking text message in her family's history. The message was simple, filled with excitement and confidence. "Off I go. The mountains are calling. Weather is perfect. Talk to you Sunday night." She attached the photograph Gerald had just taken, showing her radiant smile and the majestic peaks behind her, then tucked her phone away, and stepped toward the trailhead. The transformation that occurred in that moment was profound. Emma Davis, the daughter, the careful planner, the woman who stayed in touch with her worried mother, was about to become Emma Davis, the wilderness photographer, completely absorbed in her artistic mission. With one final adjustment to her pack straps, she disappeared into the shadows of the lodgepole pines, becoming a lone figure stepping into the vast, waiting wilderness. What's devastating about this final communication is how perfectly it captured Emma's mindset at that crucial moment. Behind the scenes of that cheerful text was a young woman who felt completely in control of her destiny, someone who had no reason to believe that danger was already watching her every move. The impact of those words, "The mountains are calling," would echo through her family's minds for months to come, a beautiful sentiment that would become tragically prophetic. Sunday evening arrived with its usual quiet rhythm in Denver, where Linda Davis checked her phone expectantly, waiting for the familiar buzz of a text from her adventurous daughter. When 9 o'clock passed without word, she felt that first tiny flicker of unease that every parent knows, that subtle shift from normal concern to something deeper. Her rational mind quickly supplied logical explanations. Maybe Emma's satellite messenger had lost its charge. Maybe she'd met other hikers and decided to extend her trip by one night. Maybe she was simply too exhausted to send a detailed message. But by Monday evening, logic had begun to fray at the edges, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that no amount of reasonable thinking could dispel. The silence from the mountains felt heavy and suffocating, each unanswered call going straight to voicemail, each text message remaining unread with that single gray checkmark suspended in an abyss of uncertainty. Linda knew her daughter's character intimately. Emma was disciplined, considerate, and would never intentionally cause this kind of worry. The hidden truth about that growing panic is how it transforms a parent's entire reality. What had started as normal maternal concern was evolving into something much darker, a gut-level understanding that something was terribly wrong. The journey from hope to fear is one that no preparation can adequately address, and Linda found herself entering territory she had never imagined having to navigate. At 7:15 p.m. on Monday, with her hands trembling so badly she could barely dial, Linda Davis made the phone call that would transform her private nightmare into an official crisis. The Summit County Sheriff's Office dispatcher listened calmly as Linda explained the situation, her voice steady at first but breaking as she gave Emma's name and planned route. Within the hour, the National Park Service was notified, and what had been a mother's growing dread became a case file, a search grid, and a question whispered into the vast, indifferent wilderness. The impact of that single phone call cannot be understated. In that moment, Emma's name transformed from that of a vibrant young woman pursuing her artistic dreams into something much more clinical, a missing person report, evidence to be collected, and a mystery that would soon consume the resources of multiple agencies. Behind the scenes of this bureaucratic machinery was still a mother's breaking heart, but the official response began not with panic, but with procedure. By first light on Tuesday morning, Park Ranger Jake Morrison found himself standing beside Emma's silver Honda in the Crystal Lake Trailhead parking lot. The transformation from bustling weekend destination to crime scene investigation site was striking. Where just days before hikers had gathered excitedly for their adventures, now there was only the cool stillness of dawn and the weight of something gone terribly wrong. Jake's 20 years with the Park Service had taught him, too, read the subtle signs that most people miss. A fine film of dust and pollen had settled on the car's windshield, a silent testament to the days it had sat unmoved. Peering inside, he found the ordinary remnants of someone's last normal day. A half-empty travel mug in the console, a folded park map on the passenger seat. Everything looked perfectly normal, which was precisely what felt so wrong. The hidden truth about these initial moments of any search operation is how quickly hope and fear begin their delicate dance. Jake's professional experience told him that most cases like this ended with a sheepish hiker emerging from the trail a day or two late, full of apologies and stories about missed turns or beautiful views that had held them captive longer than planned. But his gut instincts, honed by years of mountain rescues, were already sending different signals. The trail register inside the metal box at the trailhead confirmed the entry that would become the center of everything. Emma Davis, Wildflower Canyon, Cascade, Canyon Loop, 3 nights, expected return Sunday. But there was no corresponding sign-out entry, that crucial piece of evidence that would have indicated a safe return. This absence spoke louder than any witness statement could have. Within hours of Jake's radio report, the quiet morning air around Crystal Lake buzzed with controlled urgency as the Sierra Peaks Interagency Search and Rescue Team assembled at their makeshift command post. The transformation from peaceful wilderness to coordinated crisis response was immediate and impressive. Led by Ranger Steve Rodriguez, a man whose calm demeanor belied the immense pressure of his responsibilities, teams prepared to deploy across some of the most unforgiving terrain in the lower 48 states. The mindset shift required for this kind of operation is something most people never consider. Behind the scenes of every mountain rescue, there's a delicate balance between hope and realism, between the possibility of finding someone alive and the growing probability of recovering a body. Steve stood before a massive topographic map pinned to a board, the Wildflower Canyon Cascade Canyon Loop outlined in stark red, a 20-mile thread winding through terrain that could hide a person forever. Ground crews would hike the demanding loop from both directions, while K-9 units would be airlifted to higher elevations to work their way down following scent trails. The rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors already echoed through the valley, that familiar heartbeat that appears during times of crisis in mountain communities. Every resource available was being deployed because the first 48 hours often determine whether a search becomes a rescue or a recovery. The first major breakthrough came just after noon, and it would prove to be the beginning of a mystery that defied all logical explanation. A ground team pushing up the steep switchbacks of Wildflower Canyon spotted something that made their hearts race with hope. A small dome tent, its muted green fabric standing out against the wild tapestry of the subalpine forest. It was Emma's campsite, located in a sheltered grove of firs just a short walk from Pine Lake, exactly where her detailed itinerary said it would be. But the scene that greeted the searchers was deeply unsettling, presenting contradictions that challenged everything they understood about backcountry behavior. The tent was perfectly pitched, stakes driven firmly into the ground with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Inside, her sleeping pad was unrolled, and next to it sat her small, lightweight day pack containing only an empty water bottle, a protein bar wrapper, and a tube of sunscreen. The revelation that would haunt investigators was what was missing. Emma's main backpack, the heavy Osprey pack containing her sleeping bag, food, and critical survival gear, was gone. Her hiking boots were also missing. The scene painted a bizarre picture that violated fundamental backcountry logic. It suggested she had set up her shelter for the night, then for some inexplicable reason, had put on her boots, shouldered her heavy multi-day pack, and walked away into the wilderness, leaving her lighter day pack behind. The discovery at Emma's campsite sent a chill through the search team because it fundamentally violated every principle of wilderness survival that experienced hikers live by. The hidden truth about backcountry logic is that it's born from countless life-or-death decisions where following proven patterns can mean the difference between making it home and becoming another missing person statistic. Hikers might leave their main pack at camp to take a short day hike with just essentials, but they would never abandon their lightweight day pack while carrying heavy gear into unknown terrain. This contradiction represented more than just an anomaly. It suggested a mindset shift had occurred, either through panic, injury, or something far more sinister. Behind the scenes of this perfectly organized campsite was evidence of someone whose careful planning had been disrupted by an unknown force. The impact of this discovery transformed the entire search operation from a routine rescue mission into something much more complex and disturbing. The immediate deployment of K-9 units to the campsite brought Kaiser, a German shepherd whose experience and training had made him legendary among search teams. When Kaiser was brought to the tent flap and given Emma's scent, his response was immediate and decisive. After a moment of intense sniffing, he let out a low whine and took off with such determination that his handler had to jog to keep up. What happened next defied every expectation the search team had about how scent trails work in wilderness environments. Instead of following the established path that led deeper into the canyon or back toward the trailhead, Kaiser picked up a trail that led directly away from any logical route. The dog was following Emma's scent up a steep, scree-covered slope, choked with dense willows and dangerous deadfall. Terrain so treacherous that no experienced hiker would choose it voluntarily. The team followed Kaiser through increasingly difficult terrain, their boots slipping on loose rock as they climbed higher into areas that seemed to exist beyond the reach of human presence. After a grueling half-mile ascent that left everyone breathing hard in the thin mountain air, they arrived at a jumble of massive granite boulders and tangled, impassable deadfall. And there, in a moment that would haunt the investigation for months to come, Kaiser stopped. The revelation that followed was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire search. Kaiser circled the area frantically, his tail low, whining in confusion as he looked back at his handler. The scent trail hadn't faded or grown weak. It had simply ceased to exist, as if Emma had been lifted straight into the air from that exact spot. The handler radioed back to command, frustration and bewilderment evident in his voice. The scent terminates here. It just stops. There's nowhere else to go. While the K-9 teams were grappling with impossible scent trails, other rangers were working to track down Gerald and Eleanor, the Texas couple who had taken Emma's final photograph. They found them at a hotel in Mountain View, preparing to fly home the next morning. When investigators explained the situation, the couple was heartbroken to learn about Emma's disappearance and eagerly shared what little they remembered about their brief but meaningful interaction with the vibrant young photographer. Gerald and Eleanor confirmed Emma's cheerful demeanor and obvious excitement about her upcoming adventure. But then Eleanor's expression shifted as she concentrated on something that had been nagging at her subconscious. About 10 minutes after they had left Emma at the lake shore, she recalled, they had passed another hiker on the trail. This wasn't unusual in itself. The Sierra Peaks attract serious adventurers from around the world. But something about this particular encounter had left an uncomfortable impression. The man was alone, which wasn't uncommon for experienced hikers, but his demeanor was distinctly antisocial in a community known for its friendly trail culture. Gerald nodded in agreement as Eleanor described an intense-looking individual with a military-style pack that appeared old and faded from years of use. What struck them most was his complete lack of acknowledgement when they offered their typical friendly hiker greeting. He kept his eyes fixed forward. His weathered face set in a grim expression that seemed to radiate hostility. Behind the scenes of this seemingly minor encounter was a revelation that would transform the entire investigation. The description was vague, but in the absence of other leads, this mysterious hiker became a focal point. A forensic sketch artist was brought in, and based on Gerald and Eleanor's recollections, a composite drawing emerged showing a man in his late 30s or early 40s with gaunt features, deep-set eyes, and that unmistakable grim expression they both remembered. The impact of this sketch cannot be overstated. The intense hiker became a ghost haunting the investigation, a potential witness who might have crucial information about Emma's final hours, or perhaps something far more sinister. But with no name and no other sightings, he remained exactly that, a drawing on paper representing either innocence or evil. Then came the final blow to the initial search effort. After 5 days of clear weather that had seemed like a blessing, The western horizon darkened with bruised purple-gray clouds rolling in like an advancing army. The temperature dropped dramatically, and the rumble of distant thunder echoed through the canyons, growing steadily, closer until the storm broke with terrifying fury. Lightning spiderwebbed across the sky while sheets of cold, driving rain hammered the mountainside with relentless intensity. For the safety of the search crews, operations were called off. For 36 agonizing hours, as the storm raged with biblical fury, no one was in the field. The hidden truth about what this deluge meant was devastating. Any remaining scent trails would be obliterated, any faint footprints would be washed away, and the already treacherous terrain would become a slick and dangerous morass. After 10 days that had yielded nothing more than an abandoned tent and a scent trail that led to an impossible dead end, the resources of the massive search operation were stretched to their absolute limit. At the evening briefing on day 10, a weary Steve Rodriguez made the decision that every search coordinator dreads but eventually faces. The large-scale active search was being suspended, transitioning to what officials carefully termed limited continuous patrol. A bureaucratic phrase that families understand means the chances of finding their loved one alive are now considered negligible. The transformation of the command post from a hub of urgent activity to an empty, echoing space was profound and heartbreaking. Volunteers packed up their gear and went home to their own families. The helicopters returned to their hangars. A heavy silence fell over the operation, leaving behind only the vast wilderness and unanswered questions. For Emma's parents, who had been holding vigil in Mountain View, this announcement was devastating beyond words. But for one person, the official end of the search marked not a conclusion, but a beginning. David Davis, Emma's father and a retired land surveyor, stood staring at the topographic map in the now empty briefing room, his eyes tracing the red line that marked his daughter's intended path. Behind the scenes of his quiet demeanor was a man whose entire professional life had been built on precision, on translating the chaotic contours of the earth onto clean, logical grids. He could not comprehend a world where his daughter, a fixed and brilliant point in his own existence, could simply be erased from the landscape without a trace. The impact of this moment would define the next 11 months of David's life. While others spoke of acceptance and moving forward, his mindset shifted into something entirely different, a methodical, grief-fueled mission that would consume his retirement savings and every weekend for the foreseeable future. He sold a small parcel of land he had owned for decades, trading his comfortable retirement for a solitary quest that most people would consider futile. David's approach to finding Emma represented a fundamental transformation in how the search would be conducted. Where the official operation had relied on broad sweeps and statistical probability, his methodology would be granular and obsessive. His weekends became a grim ritual of driving the long hours from Denver to Mountain View, his old pickup truck loaded with surveying equipment, climbing gear, and enough supplies to sustain him for days in the wilderness. The hidden truth about David's private search was that it operated on principles the large-scale operation couldn't afford to employ. He created his own high-resolution topographic maps, overlaying satellite imagery with geological data and dividing the vast wilderness into small, manageable quadrants. He would spend entire days meticulously searching areas no bigger than a few acres, examining terrain that helicopter surveys had only glimpsed from above. Park rangers began to recognize his truck at remote trailheads, often arriving before sunrise and departing long after sunset. They treated him with gentle, pained respect, offering coffee and quiet words of caution about weather conditions. They understood that he was searching for something. Beyond hope, he was seeking the closure that only finding Emma could provide. David's transformation from grieving father to methodical wilderness detective represented something profound about the human spirit's refusal to accept defeat. Every weekend became a ritual of precision that would have impressed his former surveying colleagues. He approached each quadrant of his self-created grid system with the same mathematical intensity he had once applied to mapping property boundaries, but now, the stakes were infinitely more personal. The hidden truth about David's approach was that it operated on a completely different mindset than the original search operation. Where large-scale efforts necessarily focused on probability and statistical likelihood, David's methodology was exhaustive and uncompromising. He would spend an entire day examining a steep drainage or a dense thicket of woods that helicopter surveys had covered with only a passing glance from above. His journey through the wilderness was measured not in miles but in square feet, each section methodically documented and crossed off his increasingly detailed maps. Behind the scenes of this solitary quest, something else was happening that would eventually impact the case in unexpected ways. While David combed the silent, frozen Sierra Peaks in physical isolation, Emma's disappearance was gaining momentum in the digital world. On true crime subreddits and backcountry hiking forums, her case became a source of endless fascination and debate among armchair detectives from around the globe who dissected every known detail with obsessive intensity. The most prevalent theory, and the one favored by authorities, was elegantly simple in its tragedy. Emma had suffered a hiking accident, slipping on loose rock or falling from an exposed ledge, and her body had come to rest in a location hidden from searchers. A deep crevice, a dense patch of undergrowth, or a place the massive search effort had simply missed despite their best efforts. This theory had the comfort of logic and the weight of statistical probability behind it. Others, drawn to more dramatic possibilities, argued for an animal attack scenario. A grizzly bear or mountain lion, they theorized, could have ambushed a lone hiker in the remote wilderness. But the complete lack of physical evidence at her campsite, no blood, no torn clothing, no drag marks or signs of struggle, made this theory difficult for most experts to accept. A more psychologically complex narrative also emerged that painted Emma as someone who had chosen to disappear voluntarily. Online sleuths pointed to excerpts from her journals that her desperate family had shared publicly, finding meaning in her words about needing solitude and feeling disconnected from her previous life. They twisted her genuine love for wilderness into a desire to escape civilization entirely, suggesting she had orchestrated her own vanishing act. But it was the thread of foul play that proved most compelling to the online community. The mysterious, intense hiker, the man with the gaunt face and military-style pack, became a central figure in the digital mythology surrounding Emma's case. Without a name or any concrete evidence, he transformed into a blank canvas for 1,000 dark theories about predators who might stalk lone female hikers in remote wilderness areas. For months, the case remained static, trapped in a cycle of speculation and dead ends, until late August. 2024 brought what seemed like the first tangible breakthrough since Emma's tent had been discovered. A fly fisherman, navigating a remote section of Cascade Creek, several miles downstream from the main search area, spotted something glinting beneath the clear mountain water, wedged tightly between two large granite boulders. He waded in and pulled it free, revealing a single black hiking pole with a worn grip and scratched tip that he immediately recognized as high-end equipment favored by serious backcountry adventurers. The discovery sent a brief electric jolt through the cold case when park officials confirmed the pole was the exact model and brand visible in Emma's final photograph. For David and Linda Davis, this tangible piece of their daughter's presence rekindled hopes they had tried to suppress for nearly a year. Behind the scenes, a targeted search team was even dispatched to the creek area, their efforts focused with renewed intensity on the possibility that this single piece of equipment might provide the breakthrough they desperately needed, but the impact of this discovery proved to be more heartbreaking than hopeful. Hydrologists quickly explained the harsh reality of watershed dynamics in the Sierra Peaks. The powerful spring runoff could carry objects for miles, dislodging them from high mountain slopes and depositing them seemingly randomly throughout the drainage system. The pole was undeniably Emma's, a heartbreaking echo of her final day, but it provided no specific location, no new direction for the investigation. This revelation represented another cruel transformation in the case, from renewed hope back to the familiar territory of frustration and dead ends. The clue, like the scent trail the dogs had followed to its impossible termination, led nowhere concrete. It was a piece of the puzzle that didn't fit, a fragment that only deepened the sense of an unknowable void where answers should have been. As summer 2024 settled into the high country, bringing the familiar cycle of wildflowers and wildlife that marks the Sierra Peaks' brief growing season, a different kind of search was underway in the remote reaches of the range. Ranger Ryan Kim, a 15-year veteran of the National Park Service, was conducting his annual survey of golden eagle nesting sites as part of the greater ecosystem monitoring program that few visitors ever witness. Ryan's passion for ornithology represented a journey that had taken him far beyond his official duties into the realm of serious scientific research. His quiet demeanor and encyclopedic knowledge of local bird populations had earned him respect among researchers and fellow rangers alike, but his true calling lay in understanding the complex relationships between apex predators and their mountain environment. The mindset required for this work demanded patience, precision, and the ability to access terrain that challenged even experienced mountaineers. Ryan moved through the vertical world with practiced ease, his binoculars serving as a permanent extension of his vision as he documented breeding patterns and population health in one of North America's most magnificent birds of prey. In late July 2024, 11 months after Emma had vanished into the Sierra Peaks wilderness, Ryan found himself in a remote, high-altitude basin that few humans ever witnessed. The terrain was a sweeping landscape of scree slopes and sheer cliff faces, accessible only to those comfortable with technical climbing and the kind of solitude that can feel both liberating and overwhelming. From a rocky ridge, he scanned a distant cliff face through his high-powered binoculars, searching for the massive stick structures that golden eagles construct as their aerial fortresses. The transformation in Ryan's demeanor was immediate when he located his target, a sprawling nest of interwoven branches perched precariously on a narrow ledge halfway up a sheer granite wall. These structures represented months of careful construction by some of nature's most skilled architects, but as Ryan focused his lenses, something caught his attention that had nothing to do with natural behavior patterns. Mixed in with the expected browns and grays of weathered wood and dried grass were flashes of incongruous color that seemed to pulse against the neutral palette of the wilderness. A startling scrap of bright red fabric and what appeared to be a patch of vibrant turquoise material were clearly visible, woven into the very structure of the nest like foreign elements in an otherwise perfect natural design. Ryan's initial reaction was the familiar frustration that Park Service employees know all too well, the constant battle against human carelessness that leaves traces of civilization in even the most remote corners of the wilderness. His mindset shifted to protective mode, concerned that plastic debris or synthetic materials could harm the eagles or their offspring. The impact of this discovery on the local ecosystem could be significant, and his sense of duty demanded immediate action. The decision to climb up to the nest was not made lightly. The ascent would be grueling and potentially dangerous, requiring him to navigate loose scree that shifted treacherously underfoot and steep grass slopes that could send him sliding down the mountainside if he lost concentration. Behind the scenes of his scientific mission was always the calculated risk that comes with working alone in terrain where a single mistake could prove fatal. As Ryan began the arduous climb, moving slowly and deliberately while testing each handhold, his annoyance at thoughtless hikers began an unsettling transformation into something much darker. The closer he got to the nest, the more distinct those incongruous colors became, and a chilling realization started to creep into his consciousness. The red wasn't a discarded plastic bag, and the turquoise wasn't a piece of abandoned rope or camping gear. His journey up that treacherous slope was taking him toward a revelation that would shatter nearly a year of unanswered questions and transform Emma's case from a cold missing person file into something far more sinister. The hidden truth that waited in that eagle's nest would provide the key to unlocking one of the most disturbing mysteries the Sierra Peaks had ever concealed. When Ryan finally pulled himself onto that narrow mountain ledge, his heart pounding from both physical exertion and an inexplicable sense of dread, he found himself standing before a massive, chaotic masterpiece of interwoven branches nearly 5 feet across. The golden eagle nest represented years of construction and renovation, a testament to the engineering capabilities of one of nature's most impressive predators. But what he discovered woven into the very fabric of this ancient structure would transform his understanding of everything he thought he knew about Emma's disappearance. The turquoise fabric wasn't random trash. It was a tattered piece of high-quality nylon, clearly ripped from outdoor gear like a stuff sack or rain cover that serious hikers rely on for protection in harsh weather. The red material that had caught his attention from below was even more disturbing. Women's underwear, mostly white but with distinctive faded crimson trim around the waistband and leg openings. In that instant, Ryan's mind flashed back to the missing person posters that had become so familiar around the park, to the countless briefings about Emma Davis, and, most importantly, to the photograph of her at Crystal Lake Trailhead. The impact of this revelation hit him like a physical blow. Emma's blue backpack in that final photograph had been accented with bright red straps and trim. The color match was undeniably precise. The hidden truth about what he was witnessing began to crystallize in his mind with horrible clarity. This wasn't random debris that had somehow found its way into an eagle's nest. This was evidence of something far more sinister than anyone had imagined. Behind the scenes of Ryan's scientific training was a man whose instincts understood the predatory behavior of raptors better than most people. Golden eagles are not just hunters. They are also opportunistic scavengers, drawn to carrion and the scent of death. The most disturbing explanation for these items being incorporated into the nest was that an eagle, soaring high above the basin, had been attracted to the scent of blood and had scavenged pieces of clothing from Emma's body or from a nearby location where violence had occurred. Ryan backed away from the nest slowly, his hands trembling as he pulled out his service phone to document everything he was seeing. His mindset shifted from scientific observer to criminal investigator as he carefully photographed the nest and its contents from every possible angle. He understood instinctively that he was now looking at potential evidence in what might be a homicide case, and his actions in the next few minutes could determine whether justice would ever be served. The transformation of Emma's case from missing person to potential murder investigation began with Ryan's careful documentation and immediate radio call to his supervisor. When he returned to the ranger station with the carefully bagged and tagged items, investigators immediately pulled Emma's file and laid the grimy, weathered underwear next to a high-resolution printout of her final photograph. The shade of red on the weathered underwear was a startlingly precise match to the accent straps on Emma's backpack, and, as investigators laid the evidence side by side, a grim silence fell over the room. The implications of Ryan's discovery were reshaping everything they understood about Emma's disappearance. The hidden truth behind this bizarre find was actually rooted in the ancient predatory instincts that had guided golden eagles for millennia. These magnificent birds are not just hunters, but also opportunistic scavengers with an acute ability to detect the scent of death from incredible distances. The most plausible and most disturbing explanation was that an eagle, soaring high above the remote basin during its daily hunting patterns, had been drawn to the unmistakable scent of blood. It had landed, torn at fabric with its powerful talons, and carried away bright, durable scraps that would serve perfectly for reinforcing its nest. This single bizarre discovery represented a complete transformation in the investigation's focus and methodology. The impact of Ryan's find meant that Emma hadn't simply fallen into a random crevice somewhere in the vastness of the Sierra Peaks wilderness. It meant her body, or what remained of it, was almost certainly located somewhere on or very near that specific remote hillside. The search was no longer a needle-in-a-haystack operation spanning hundreds of square miles. It had become a laser-focused grid covering less than 1 square mile of brutal but manageable terrain. Behind the scenes of this revelation, Park Service officials were authorizing a completely different kind of search operation. This wasn't about hope anymore, wasn't about the possibility of finding someone alive who had been surviving in the wilderness for nearly a year. The mindset had shifted to something much darker and more final. They were looking for a grave, and they had a predator's instinct to guide them to the general vicinity. The specialized team that assembled represented the kind of expertise that gets called upon when the worst is suspected rather than hoped against. Forensic anthropologists from the state university, accustomed to reading stories written in bone and soil, flew in to join seasoned members of Summit County Search and Rescue who specialized in high-angle recovery operations. Cadaver dog teams, their animals trained to detect the scent of human decomposition even after months of mountain weather, were airlifted to a staging area in the basin below the Eagle's Nest. The transformation in atmosphere was immediately apparent to everyone involved. The helicopter's rotors washed the alpine meadows in frantic, unnatural wind, but the heavy silence among the team members spoke to a shared understanding of what they were likely to discover. This was sacred ground now, a place of immense natural beauty that had become the backdrop to human tragedy, and they moved with the reverence that such circumstances demand. The journey ahead would require them to traverse some of the most challenging terrain in the Sierra Peaks, but their search area was now defined by precision rather than desperation. They had a target, a focus, and the grim certainty that comes when evidence points toward an inevitable conclusion. The search grid was small, but the terrain was brutally unforgiving, a treacherous mix of steep, grassy slopes where every step could send loose scree sliding like marbles. Underfoot, jagged rock outcroppings that demanded careful navigation, and dense patches of thorny brush that seemed designed to tear at clothing and skin. The specialized team moved with methodical precision, their approach representing a complete transformation from the broad sweeps of the original search to this surgical examination of a precisely defined area. For 2 days they found nothing but the profound silence that seems to emanate from high mountain places, where the thin air carries sound differently, and the vastness of the landscape can make human voices feel impossibly small. The sun beat down relentlessly during the day while the team worked in their careful grid pattern, and doubt began to creep into the operation as the second evening approached without any significant discoveries. The mindset shift that occurred on the third morning was subtle but crucial, just as some of the team members were beginning to question whether Ryan's Eagle Nest discovery had led them in the right direction. Odin, a black Labrador whose training and experience had made him legendary among cadaver dog teams, gave the definitive alert that everyone had been both hoping for and dreading. Near a dense cluster of thorny brush and stunted, wind-warped trees growing at the base of a series of large granite boulders, Odin stopped abruptly and began to whine with that low, insistent sound that his handler recognized immediately. The dog pawed at the ground with increasing urgency, his entire body language communicating the unmistakable message that he had found his target. Behind the scenes of this moment was years of specialized training that had taught Odin to detect the scent of human decomposition, even after months of mountain weather and seasonal changes. The team converged on the spot with a mixture of professional focus and personal dread. To an untrained observer, the area looked like nothing more than a natural depression filled with rocks and dense vegetation. But Dr. Sarah Martinez, the forensic anthropologist leading the recovery effort, could see the subtle signs that spoke to her trained eye. The way the rocks were piled defied natural erosion patterns, and the depression in the soil suggested human intervention rather than geological processes. The excavation that followed was painstaking work that required infinite patience and scientific precision. Using small trowels and brushes, the team carefully removed layers of soil and rock, documenting each step with photographs and detailed measurements. After several hours of meticulous work, one of the searchers paused when his trowel scraped against something that felt different from stone or earth. Brushing away the dirt revealed a piece of faded blue fabric, the unmistakable material of a technical hiking shirt. The discovery of skeletal remains in that shallow grave, no more than 2 feet deep, represented the end of nearly a year of questions and the beginning of a much darker chapter in Emma's story. The impact of this moment on her family would be devastating. Confirmation of their worst fears mixed with the bitter relief that she had finally been found. The remains were carefully documented, photographed, and airlifted to the county morgue, where the identification process was swift and definitive. Dental records provided a positive match within 24 hours. The skeletal remains belonged to Emma Davis. For David and Linda, this confirmation represented a complex and devastating emotional journey. The agony of their worst fears being realized mixed with the faintest whisper of relief that their daughter had finally been found and could come home. But the forensic examination that followed would reveal a truth far more horrific than a simple hiking accident or even an animal attack. Dr. Martinez's detailed analysis of the bones uncovered multiple fractures, including a significant one on the skull that was unmistakably consistent with severe blunt force trauma. The pattern of injury told a story that no parent should ever have to hear. This was not the result of a fall or wilderness mishap. The evidence pointed definitively to violent assault. The hidden truth that emerged from the forensic analysis was even more devastating. Trace evidence found with the remains and subsequent laboratory testing confirmed what investigators had begun to suspect. Emma had been sexually assaulted before she was murdered. The transformation of this case from missing person to tragic accident to confirmed homicide represented every family's worst nightmare becoming reality. Behind the scenes of this official reclassification, investigators were forced to completely re-examine every assumption they had made about Emma's disappearance. The mindset shift was profound. They were no longer looking for explanations about how someone could get lost in the wilderness. They were hunting for a predator who had used the isolation and beauty of the Sierra Peaks as his personal hunting ground. The impact of this revelation threw the entire investigation into a new and terrifying light, where the vague description of the intense hiker suddenly became the single most important clue they possessed. The composite sketch that had once been a curious footnote was now their only hope of finding a brutal killer who had turned one of America's most beautiful wilderness areas into a crime scene. The breakthrough that would crack the case wide open came from an unexpected source. Brenda Williams, working the front desk at a budget motel in Riverside, Colorado, was watching the local evening news when the composite sketch appeared on her television screen. The face that stared back at her, those deep-set, vacant eyes and grim-set jaw, triggered an immediate jolt of recognition that made her blood run cold. She had seen that face before, and the memory was one she couldn't forget. The man in the sketch had stayed at her motel for several weeks during the previous summer, paying for his room week to week in cash and keeping to himself with an intensity that had made her uncomfortable. He claimed to be in the area for seasonal construction work, but something about his demeanor had set off alarm bells in her intuition. What Brenda remembered most clearly was the timing of his abrupt departure. This man, who had been methodically paying for his room week by week and seemed settled into a routine, had suddenly checked out without a word, just a few days after the news of the missing hiker first broke on local television. She immediately called the Summit County Sheriff's tip line, her voice shaking slightly as she provided them with the name she remembered from her guest ledger, Michael Harrison. With a name finally attached to the composite sketch, the investigation accelerated exponentially. The transformation from a cold case with virtually no leads to an active manhunt was immediate and intense. A multi-agency task force began, digging into Harrison's background, and what they discovered painted a picture of a ghost-like predator who had been moving through the American West for years, always staying just ahead of scrutiny. Michael Harrison was a 42-year-old transient with virtually no digital footprint but a sealed juvenile record for violent assault. His journey through life had been one of deliberate invisibility, taking under-the-table construction and ranching jobs, never staying in one place long enough to establish connections or leave lasting impressions. Behind the scenes of his nomadic lifestyle was a carefully calculated strategy for avoiding detection while pursuing his dark impulses. By cross-referencing employment records and contacting labor agencies across multiple states, investigators traced his path from Colorado to Utah, where they learned he was currently employed as a ranch hand on a large, isolated property outside Boulder Creek. The impact of this discovery meant that the man who had haunted their investigation for months was within reach, living and working just a few hundred miles from where Emma had been murdered. Armed with search warrants and arrest orders, a heavily armed team of FBI agents and local sheriff's deputies descended on the ranch at dawn. Harrison was taken completely by surprise and arrested without incident, his demeanor flat and emotionless in a way that chilled the seasoned law enforcement officers who had seen every type of criminal reaction imaginable. The hidden truth about Harrison's true nature was revealed when investigators searched a dusty, cobweb-filled shed where he stored his meager belongings. Inside a battered military-style footlocker secured with a heavy padlock, they found what could only be described as a predator's trophy collection. Driver's licenses belonging to multiple women, assorted pieces of jewelry, locks of hair, and other deeply personal items that spoke to a pattern of violence spanning years. At the very bottom of this horrific collection, wrapped carefully in an old T-shirt, was Emma's Nikon camera. The serial number was a perfect match for the equipment she had carried on her final hike, and when FBI technicians accessed the camera's memory card at their regional forensics lab, they uncovered evidence so damning and disturbing that it would ensure Harrison never saw freedom again. The first several dozen photographs on Emma's memory card were the beautiful, haunting landscapes she had captured. During her final hike, images that showcased her incredible artistic talent and deep connection to the wilderness she loved. But then, the gallery took a nightmarish turn that revealed the true scope of Harrison's depravity. The last sequence of images had been taken by Harrison himself, creating a graphic and horrifying documentation of his crime that served as his own confession. The photographs showed Emma's face twisted in terror as she fought for her life, the assault itself, and images taken after her death. These weren't random acts of violence. They were the calculated documentation of a predator who took pride in his ability to destroy innocent lives. The impact of these images on the investigation team was profound, providing undeniable evidence while simultaneously revealing the depth of evil they were confronting. The interrogation that followed Harrison's arrest was initially marked by his practiced silence and confident denial. For hours, he sat impassively in that sterile room, weathering every question with the blank expression of someone who believed that without his cooperation, no conviction was certain. The transformation in his demeanor came not from clever questioning, but from the methodical presentation of his own photographic evidence. When FBI agents began laying out the images on the metal table between them, one by one in chronological order, Harrison's facade cracked completely. The hidden truth was that he had been so confident in his ability to evade capture that he had created his own downfall through his need to document and relive his crimes. After 7 full minutes of silence, he simply said, "That's me," and began describing his assault on Emma with chilling detachment. Behind the scenes of this confession was a predator whose mindset revealed the calculated nature of his crimes. He admitted to spotting Emma at the trailhead, following her at a distance, and waiting until she left her tent to get water before ambushing her. When asked why he killed her, his answer was devoid of any recognizable human emotion. She had fought back with unexpected ferocity, and he killed her to maintain control. The trial that followed was mercifully brief, with Harrison's confession and photographic evidence creating an airtight case that resulted in a life sentence without possibility of parole. But the journey toward justice extended far beyond Emma's case. The driver's licenses and personal items found in Harrison's trophy collection unlocked multiple cold cases across the Rocky Mountains, providing long-overdue answers to families who had endured years of agonizing uncertainty. Emma's memorial service was held at an overlook in the Sierra Peaks, with the cathedral spires she had loved standing as silent granite witnesses. Her father, David, spoke of gratitude for the investigators who never gave up, while her family began the difficult process of healing. Emma's story reminds us that even in our most beautiful and sacred places, we must remain vigilant and aware. The wilderness she loved so deeply became both the scene of unimaginable tragedy and ultimately the source of the evidence that brought her killer to justice. Her legacy lives on not just in the stunning photographs she created, but in the reminder that preparation, awareness, and community support can make the difference between safety and vulnerability in the backcountry. The transformation that her case brought about extends beyond just one family's closure. Harrison's conviction and the solving of multiple cold cases across the Rocky Mountains demonstrates how persistence, scientific investigation, and sometimes unexpected discoveries can illuminate even the darkest mysteries. Behind the scenes of every missing person case are families who refuse to give up hope, investigators who continue searching long after resources are exhausted, and communities that rally together when one of their own is in danger. if you've stayed with me through this entire journey, exploring the complex investigation that finally brought answers to Emma's family, I think you'd appreciate the other stories I share here. The cases I cover go deep into the human experience, examining not just what happened, but how communities respond, how families cope, and how justice sometimes emerges from the most unexpected places. Hit that subscribe button if you value this kind of thoughtful investigation into stories that matter. These aren't just sensationalized headlines. They're examinations of real people whose experiences teach us something important about resilience, determination, and the pursuit of truth. If you made it all the way to the end of Emma's story, leave me a comment saying, "Truth emerges through persistence." So I know we took this difficult but important journey together. And if this story moved you the way it moved me while researching it, that like button helps more people discover these meaningful investigations. There's a video right here that complements this topic perfectly. Another case where nature itself provided the key evidence that investigators needed. Click and continue with me over there, because some stories deserve to be told with the depth and respect they require.